Hi, I'm Billy Keels, the host of the Going Long podcast. Every week, I'm going to be here interviewing the absolute best in the business as it relates to real asset investing, as well as real Main Street investors. We're going to be having conversations where you can listen in, and that's going to help you to continue on your path to education so that you feel much more comfortable as well as confident in investing long distance. So make sure that you go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Make sure that you're liking it as well, because that way you can get every single episode as soon as it comes out. And by the way, don't forget to leave today's episode a 5-star review. Let's go ahead and listen to today's conversation. Welcome to the Going Long podcast. I'm your host, Billy Keels, and today we have an extremely special show for you. So if you've ever been trying to figure out how you want to deploy capital and or look for the right teams to be a part of, then you're absolutely going to love this show, because we have a master in this area and these areas and many others that's going to be joining us. You're going to get a chance to learn a lot from him and also understand how you can attack these and many of the other opportunities that you see in front of you. And Victor Menasce is our guest today. And Victor, it is a major pleasure to welcome you onto the Going Long podcast today.
Great to be here.
This is fantastic. So many things I'd like for us to jump into. I guess first and foremost, just to help everyone understand, Victor, not only a 2-time author, one of my absolute favorite books ever, which is Magnetic Capital, was one of the 2 books we'll talk about and get into some of the content there. Syndicator, developer, educator, and host of one of the most popular podcasts on the circuit today, which is the Real Estate Espresso podcast. And for those of you listening, Victor's taken a really non-traditional path to getting into real estate and in this part of the business building. If you've ever been on an Airbus and you like the in-flight entertainment, you're definitely going to want to listen to this part of the story. And hailing all the way from Canada's capital city, Mr. Victor Menasce, if you could tell us a little bit about your story and what some of the different actions you've taken to get to this point in your journey.
Well, I started my career as a technology guy. I started as a microprocessor designer. I have a degree in electrical engineering. And my path into real estate was definitely not the traditional path. Like you mentioned, if you've ever flown on an Airbus aircraft, the seatback display that shows the movies and TV shows, that's from a French company called Thales. And that's my microprocessor controlling that display. Hundreds of different applications all over the world. I'm in Panasonic printers, Canon printers, Hewlett-Packard storage networks, Apple Airport Express, Cisco Wi-Fi access points. 52% of the phone calls in North America for about a decade were routed by a processor that I designed. And so that is my background. And so I came into the world of real estate investing through a pretty non-traditional path. Think about 2009, I was working on building a cellular network in Japan for the number 4 carrier called Wilcom. And I was literally commuting back and forth to Tokyo every 2 weeks. It was burning me out physically, emotionally. It was just really not the right thing for me, not the right thing for my family. Decided at that time to make a hard left turn in my career and to move into the world of real estate investing full time. If I was to do it again, I would probably do it a little bit differently. I was a little too optimistic about how quickly I could make that transition. And I went in, I literally threw myself in the deep end. Now, I went from making a pretty decent salary at that time, into the high 6 figures. And that went from that number to 0 overnight. And I was hoping that my real estate income would replace that. That's like trying to jump across the Grand Canyon and hoping you don't fall in the ditch. It's a big leap to make. If I was to do it again, I probably would have done it a bit more gradually. I would have burned a lot less savings, but definitely was the right thing to do. And a decade later, I'm developing projects in multiple different geographies and having a great time doing it. So that's my backstory.
Awesome. So, just from the non-traditional background, a lot of in the IT space and all those different names and areas that you've talked about, I'm sure that we've been affected by your life or by the things that you've done in your previous life, definitely. And so you talked about one of the things that you, at a point in your life when you didn't really have to, and maybe recognizing that maybe not necessarily the right time. I guess when you look at the kind of the steps. You said that you would look, maybe not do it with so much of your savings, things like that. But
Right.
I guess help us understand, in spite of all that, you still made the decision that it was the time to do it. Can you talk us through why that moment was the right moment for you?
It's funny. I took myself from being kind of at the top of the business. I had an executive role in the tech industry. I was vice president of engineering, had, very large teams working for me in last several companies that I worked at, and raised a lot of capital, raised a lot of seed capital, raised a lot of leverage buyout capital. So I learned how to raise capital in the tech industry. And when I did that, I was leveraging not just money, I was leveraging teams, I was leveraging expertise. And when I moved into the world of real estate investing, I started out as a small business. In fact, I started too small. I made one of the classic mistakes that a lot of people make, which is saying, well, I'm just getting started, so I'm going to start small. And I probably should have skipped that step because I already knew how to run larger businesses. And I started at the bottom of the business. And for those of you who might be listening to this at home, this might resonate. If you start at the bottom, it means you're doing all of the jobs. You're doing all the clerical work. You're doing $10 an hour work, as opposed to hiring people to do the $10 an hour work and concentrating your efforts, your value to where it makes the most impact. And that's really where I should have started. So I would have done a lot better to keep my job, hire somebody at 40 grand a year, even hire two people at 40 grand a year. I would have still had more than half of my salary left over to feed my family. Now I would have 16 hours a day of manpower that I could apply to the projects, and I'd still be way further ahead versus what I did, which is I quit my job, I took my income to zero and started burning through savings. Now, fortunately, the same company hired me back a couple of months later for essentially the same money on a consulting basis, 3 days a week. So I was able to extend that financial runway for a period of time, but still, it was probably the wrong thing to do. I should have taken a portion of my salary, invested it in the business, as opposed to zeroing out my salary and investing all of my time in the business.
That's a key concept, and I know you talk about leveraging teams and leveraging. I think ultimately it's really the efforts of others, right? And so
Absolutely.
looking at the cost of capital versus the freedom in terms of time to be able to do other things. I think that's a great way to look at it. And so, Victor, one of the things that I've recognized as a true strength in you is really this whole concept of team. You talked about it in your corporate life, and now you're excelling at that as a real estate entrepreneur in business. So can you tell us a little bit about your philosophy when it comes to understanding and working with high performing teams?
This is always a learning process. It's a lesson that I've learned many times in my career, and sometimes it feels like I'm relearning it all over again as problems come up, as they invariably do. Virtually every single problem that we've encountered in business, doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it was in the tech industry, if it was in real estate, in oil and gas. It doesn't matter what it is. Every single problem that I've encountered, I can trace it back to one root cause, and that's because I had the wrong people in the wrong chairs at that moment in time. Okay, we live at a moment in time in history where you might say, okay, here's an act of God coming down. You get struck by lightning, you get struck by coronavirus, whatever it might be. Those things can happen, but those are rare events. The most common event, the most common reason for a screw up is because you had the wrong people in the wrong chairs. And I see that over and over and over again.
Yeah. And so when we're looking at like maybe not having, and I'm quoting Jim Collins here, talking about getting the right people on the bus. And so when you've seen that that's happened in the past, in terms of making sure that you do get the right people on the bus, maybe if you could give us one or two of the things that you do today to make sure that as much as possible, you're getting the right person on the bus for the specific role.
So I'll give you a very simple example. You can hire a lawyer, for example. You might say, okay, well, I don't need just any lawyer. I need a lawyer that specializes, let's say, in syndication. So you hire a syndication attorney, and they're supposed to be the expert in that domain. Well, even within that domain, not all syndication attorneys are created equal. There are those that will simply go through the motions. They will do a paint by numbers, everything is template based, and that they're hoping at the end of that paint by numbers that you've got a Rembrandt. But that's not always necessarily the case. There was one particular lawyer that we've worked with in the past, and thankfully are working with again. He had some health issues last year, and so he wasn't available for a number of, actually it was 2 years ago, he wasn't available for a number of months. So we ended up having to work with somebody else, and the result was not as good. There were all kinds of steps that were skipped simply because they were taking a very, like I said, paint by numbers approach, as opposed to more of a holistic approach, someone taking the time to truly understand the business from a holistic point of view, and really really quarterback the entire thing, not just the small piece that he was responsible for. And so it comes down to certain qualities. It's qualities like initiative. It's qualities like having that agency. And when you bring anyone into your team, it's not just the skill set that you're looking for. It's not just the experience. It's, do they have those right characteristics?
Excellent. So having the right characteristics and being able to look at that. I love the example from an attorney perspective. And so a lot of times, one of the key things that I hear you saying in this specific example is that they spent the time, they invested the time up front to understand specifically what you needed to express. They took that on board and then created something that was done in the right way. So it's really cost versus value, and making sure that
Absolutely.
you're teaming with those that provide the right value.
Absolutely. That's exactly right.
Okay. And so, Victor, one of the things that you also do, I mentioned before that you're from the nation's capital in Canada, in Ottawa. And today you talked about geographically that you and your teams are working across different places. Could you give us a sense of kind of where geographically you and your teams are working today?
So today we're very active in several markets. We are in Philadelphia, we are in Louisiana, we're in Texas, we're up in the Rocky Mountains, and even now, finally, in my home city of Ottawa, Canada, doing a project here as well. And that's been a long time in coming. Now, in the world of real estate investing, a lot of people think that this is a hyper-local business, and it is. But hyper-local means you understand the dynamics of the market at a hyper-local level. It doesn't mean it needs to be within a 10-minute drive of your house. And that's the difference. Oftentimes, hyper-local means it's got to be in your own backyard. And in the case of real estate investing, it doesn't. Robert Helmson, the real estate guy, says, live where you want to live, invest where the numbers make sense. And I think it's important to have that separation. We know that in multiple other industries. I come from the tech industry. We had people in Silicon Valley. Why in Silicon Valley? Well, just because that's where there was that concentration of talent. I had teams in Austin, Texas, in Raleigh, North Carolina, in Israel, in the UK, in India. So here, when I was in the tech industry, I had 13 design centers reporting to me at all in different geographic locations. So it was very normal to be working with people on the phone day in, day out. My average day in the tech industry was spent largely on the phone. Well, in real estate, it's exactly the same for me. But for many real estate investors that are just starting out, they're driving to the job site. And I almost never drive to the job site.
So that's, that's phenomenal. So across different geographies, and if I understood you correctly, you said that you're just now getting started in investing in Ottawa, or projects in Ottawa, which means that
Right.
you actually got started beyond your backyard. So in a different market, and things are still working just fine.
Well, yeah, that's partly true. So the very first project I did, if I go back, say, to 2006, when I first started in real estate, while I still had a tech job, I was doing projects locally, but I moved very quickly from that to doing projects in other geographies. I went to Phoenix, Arizona, went to projects in Florida, did a bunch of waterfront properties along the coastline in Florida. We did Chicago, did all kinds of different projects in different geographies. So it was very normal for me to do something that was not necessarily right next door, because I developed that skill set, developed that muscle in the tech industry.
That's fantastic. And also, even though you did start maybe the first one in your backyard,
Right.
you were constantly traveling. I mean, we just mentioned that you were, a high level exec in the tech industry, and probably weren't at home every single day. So being able to do that is something that can definitely happen. So, in terms of understanding that you are now this, aside from working with teams, being able to attract capital. This is something that you constantly are improving, that you would say. I say it's something that you master, but kind of talk to us about your principles around being able to not only deploy capital, but at the same time, be able to attract that capital.
It's interesting. If I'm speaking in front of a live audience, I'll often ask the question, I'll say, put up your hand if you're uncomfortable asking for money. And most hands will go up. And that's right. That's as it should be. You should never be asking for money. On the other hand, put up your hand if you're comfortable giving people the opportunity to collaborate with you on a project. That's a very different posture. When you approach it from that perspective, not just playing with words, this isn't just, trying to fool yourself with a little bit of mindset here. It really is a different perspective. When you're looking to attract capital, money's always looking for good opportunities. And so you're looking for that perfect fit between the goals for your project and the goals for the money. And when I discovered how to raise capital in the tech industry, relearned it again in the real estate industry, relearned it again when it came to philanthropy. If there isn't that perfect fit, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to raise the capital. But when the right elements are in place, I discovered there's really 5 major principles. And when those 5 principles are in place, you get that alignment. Everything just sort of fits together without anything feeling forced. And when that happens, raising money is remarkably easy. But if any one of those elements, one or more of them, are missing, it gets extraordinarily difficult. So the 5 principles, quite simply, number 1, you've got to have a relationship with a person who is potentially going to be investing in your project. And it starts with relationship. You want to use that relationship for the benefit of the relationship, not for the money. If you're using people for money, you're using them, and you don't want to be using them. You want it, the foundation has to be a genuine relationship. Number 2, you have to establish that trust. And the trust isn't just, are you an honest person? It's a psychological contract that has a lot of layers to it. It's questions like, can I trust you to put together a good team? Can I trust you to hire the right people? Can I trust you to execute the plan? Can I trust you to communicate in an open and transparent way? Can I trust you with my money? And on and on and on. And if any one of those are missing, then it starts to erode the trust. Can I trust you with small commitments? All these things are vitally, vitally important. Number 3, what's your track record? Show me that you know how to make money. If you've had a problem, how have you handled it in the past? Those things are vitally important. Now, you might be starting out saying, well, I haven't got a track record yet. How can I raise any capital without a track record? How can I get a track record if I can't raise any capital? It's a circular argument. I'm stuck. But remember, this is not like your grade 3 math test where if you work with the person sitting next to you, it's called cheating. This is a team sport, and business is a team sport. So you definitely want to have those complementary skills. Now you might say, okay, I don't have 20 years of apartment construction in my background. Okay, that's fine. Well, go align yourself with someone in your team who does. My partner Bob has built 10,000 units in his career. So when I go in front of a lender looking for a construction loan, yes, I've done a bunch of construction, but nowhere close to what he's done. So now I bring him along with me, and that conversation just never even comes up. So having that track record in your team is vitally important. And now it doesn't mean you have to make a career out of it with that individual. Maybe you go work with them for a year or 2 until you assemble that experience base, and now you literally can borrow some of their credibility because you've earned it. Number 4 is you've got to have a compelling opportunity. And this is where most people start. They say, oh man, I've got a deal. Have I got a deal for you? And it's almost never about the deal. That's one of the last things you look at. Yes, it's important. It's got to be there. It's got to be compelling, but it's not the most important thing. It's not what you lead with. When we talk about is the deal compelling, there's 3 elements to that. Number 1, you got to look at the deal itself. You've got to look at the team that's been assembled around it, and you've got to look at the submarket. And so when you're performing due diligence on that opportunity, you got to be looking at all 3 of those. And then finally, you've got to be looking at what's called alignment. And this is that perfect fit between the goals for the money and the goals for the project. So this breaks down further into about a dozen different elements. It's things like, what's the size of the investment? What's the term of the investment? Meaning, how long is the money going to be tied up for? What's the rate of return? What's the security? What's the risk? What's the tax consequence? What's the control structure? And on and on. It's often very seductive to think that I've got a partial match between my goals and theirs. And so it's seductive to think you've got something that almost works, because of course, something that almost works doesn't. If it doesn't work, don't try and force it. It's got to be that natural fit. It's got to fit like a glove. It's got to fit like a pair of shoes. And if it doesn't fit, it's okay. This is, don't waste people's time. Don't try and force it. Go find the people for whom it is the right fit. And if you have all 5 of those elements, raising money is remarkably easy.
So, Victor, when you're attracting capital, I love that. I just want to recap that really quickly, and then I have a question about the shoes, because I think there's something that I've heard you talk about in the past, because I've had the benefit that I think it's really going to crystallize that last point. But just in terms of the relationship, you want to be able to focus on the relationship for the relationship's sake. And when you talk about trust, and I know that there is I've read a book called The Speed of Trust by Stephen
Covey's son. Yeah,
exactly, Stephen Covey's son, and that gives a lot of really great ideas as well. And when you're talking about the results and the results of the team, I think that is absolutely key, because it is about the team and the experience of the overall team, having the compelling opportunities, looking at those 3 different areas: the deal, the team, as well as the sub-market. And once again, this is a concept that we're coming back to on the sub-market. And then lastly, the alignment in the different areas you talked about, from the size, the term, the security that is there, et cetera. But just to help us understand, I mean, I've heard you talk about shoes, and I know you just mentioned it now. Can you give us that analogy so that we understand exactly what you mean when you're talking about the alignment?
Sure. Imagine for a moment that you're going to the shopping mall, and you walking down the mall, you come across a shoe store and you see the most beautiful pair of shoes, and you go, "Oh my goodness, I would love to own those shoes." And my gosh, it's your lucky day. They're on sale. You go in and you try them on and they don't fit. You're not a buyer. It doesn't matter how beautiful they are or how deeply discounted they are. If they don't fit, you're not a buyer. You say, "Oh, that's too bad." And then you move on. And then there's no emotional baggage associated with that. Either they fit or they don't. When we talk about shoes, it's easy to understand. Everybody gets it. And guess what? When we start having the same conversation about money, people get all weird about it. It's exactly the same. Exactly the same. So think of it just like that shoe analogy. And if you're trying to force the fit, it's not going to work.
That goes beyond gold. That's platinum advice. And if when you are in that situation, Victor's just described something that you don't want to be on the other end of someone where the alignment is not there. It's just an uncomfortable situation for everyone involved. So thanks for sharing that, Victor. I do want to come back to this concept of, because you've made a conversation of the things that you learned from the tech industry that you're actually now using in terms of skills that in your entrepreneurial life today. So maybe if you could talk to us a little bit about the transferability, if we can say that, of skills that you can see that you can also use to help analyze or put yourself in a better position when you're looking to align with the right teams and looking to look for the right opportunities.
It really depends on what role you intend to take in the business, because these are all going to be partnerships of one form or another. The fact is, you need multiple different skills in any business. It doesn't matter if you're working in a technology company, running a restaurant, running a real estate business. It's all the same. You need an executive leadership, someone who's going to be that orchestra conductor, who's going to put the whole thing together, who's going to create the structure. You might be working in a company today where you are working within a structure that's already been defined for you. It's a very different thing to work within a structure than to create the structure from scratch. And so you have to have that ability. And if you don't have that ability, you've got to get someone in your team who has the ability to create that structure from nothing. Using a structure and creating it for the first time are very, very different skill sets. So that's number one. And when I was working in particular in technology startups, that was one of the things that I had to do, is I had to create that structure from nothing. I had to figure out, okay, so here we are, we got a dozen guys, we got some money. What are we going to do? You're starting from a blank sheet of paper. You've got to create structure from nothing. And this is no different. So this is probably the number one skill. Now, when you have, so then what structure do you actually need? You need people who are going to be responsible for the financials, meaning they're going to be counting the money, making sure that it gets allocated according to the direction that's been set by the executive team. So that's an important function. It's an important role. You've got to have the folks that are going to be responsible for the technical implementation, for the actual execution of the business. Then you need another group of folks or another part of the organization that is responsible for performing quality assurance. Again, if you're talking in the tech industry, everybody says, oh yeah, I need a test team. Of course. It's exactly the same. Doesn't matter what business you're in, you need a quality assurance function. You can't get the folks who are doing the work to check their own work. It's like, it just doesn't work. So you have to have an independent team doing that. You've got to have people that are communicating with existing customers. It's a separate function. You've got to have people that are communicating with prospective customers. That's a different function. We often call that marketing and sales. That's bringing in new business. You've got to have folks that are setting systems, processes, and procedures internally so that you actually have a viable, sustainable business. Those are the core functions. If you say, wow, that sounds like an awful lot. And it is a lot. There are 7 separate functions required to run any business. How do you do that if you're only 1 or 2 people? The minimum, in my opinion, that you need to run any business is you need 3 people performing those 7 functions. You can double up some of the functions. There's a lot of them that don't go together. Like, again, you cannot do the quality assurance and the execution in the same person. Maybe you have your marketing person perform the QA, someone who's independent. So you can collapse it down to a minimum of 3 people, in my opinion. You can't do anything less than that and have a viable, sustainable business.
Perfect. So you talked about those things, and starting from the top, having the executive leadership, really then afterwards looking and understanding the financials. From there, the technical implementation, have quality assurance, also working with existing customer base, as well as attracting new customers, both marketing and sales. And then when you look at your business, being able to make sure that there's a segregation of duties, as you mentioned before, and the checks and balances. So I think with that type of an overview, Victor, that's really helpful, especially for those of us that are in the corporate world, and really understanding how that can also translate, because from a business perspective, it looks just the same on a different scale for a real estate business. So those are the types of things that you can take away and see the different types of transferable skills between the different worlds, which makes it easier to understand.
Well, that's exactly right. So if we talk about, for me and my role in the business, because we've got to have those other functions, some of the skills that I brought over from the tech industry, certainly project management's one of them. The ability, I write reasonably well, so I can communicate reasonably well. I can put together a specification, so I can understand things at a fairly deep level. I can go broad or I can go deep. That's an important skill set to have. Not everybody has that. You often get people that go very narrow and very deep. They're specialists. They're deep in the technical, and that's okay. You need those people, but you can't put them in the wrong role. You can't put them necessarily in a pure leadership role where they've got to have a broad view of things, and they may not have the skills to put together, or the attributes, maybe is a better word. They may not have the attributes to put together that broader structure. They might be able to analyze something deep, but they may not necessarily be able to assemble disparate items from completely unrelated areas into a complete picture. So it's important to have those, not just skills, but those different characteristics within that team. It's got to be that complementary team.
Okay, fantastic. So the complementary team with the different skills, the characteristics, and the attributes, are things to look at. We've talked about a number of things. I guess as we start to wrap up, it is phenomenal in such a short amount of time to have learned so much from you, Victor. I mean, just from the very beginning, from a non-traditional background, so someone who's been working in big corporate entities and making that transition. You say you maybe made it a little bit too soon. You're sharing some of that with us to be able to understand it's not just about the it's not just about the cost or the money that's there. There's also the time, and ultimately, none of us can ever get any of the time back. So, before we, I guess, wrap up everything, I do want to ask you kind of the last three questions,
Sure.
if you're up for it.
Yeah.
All right,
Go for it.
awesome, perfect. So this is the going long final three, as what we call them. So, and with me being based here in Europe and traveling all over the place, I really would love to know, Victor, from you, and you have a lot of roots here as well. What is your favorite European city, either that you visited or is still on your bucket list?
There's so many. I've traveled an awful lot all over Europe. I would have to say that my absolute favorite town in all of Europe is St. Moritz in Switzerland.
Oh, very
It's a
nice.
beautiful, beautiful town. It's got a lake at the center, and you can literally walk around the lake in about an hour and a bit. It's not a super long walk. It's a very compact town. Everything's accessible. Everything's within walking distance. You can, from the edge of town, literally take a hike straight up into the mountains. You can get on the cable car if you want and go up to Corviglia or to Pitzner. You can get up into the high mountains literally within minutes, and everything, shops, restaurants, everything is within just a few hundred meters. It is a complete community compressed. It's just one of the most beautiful places on earth.
St. Moritz, Switzerland. Perfect. So thanks for sharing that with us, Victor. Second question. And when we look at life, you've been through, you've had a number of learning opportunities. Some would call them mistakes. And just curious, what are the lesson, or what is the lesson, if you think of one thing specifically, the lesson that you paid full price for, that you would like to share with everybody else so that they don't have to pay full price?
It's what I talked about at the very beginning. All of the mistakes that I've made can really be attributed to having the wrong people in the wrong chairs. Every single one, almost without exception. Yes, you can look. You can, if a balloon pops, it's very easy to blame the pin, but it's usually not the pin's fault. It's usually had something to do with the construction of that balloon to begin with, and if that wasn't put together properly, meaning the right people in the right chairs, the balloon will pop. If that balloon doesn't have integrity, it's going to pop. And like I said, it's easy to blame the pin. It's not the pin's fault. So you got to construct it properly. That means putting together the right team.
Love that. Thanks. And thanks for coming back to that, Victor. It's definitely something that's important, making sure that you've learned to make sure you get the right people on the bus. And the last question for the day is also in the same spirit of sharing and helping others. And before you even say that, I want to come back to this. And if you're watching this, this is Magnetic Capital is a book that personally has made a big positive influence on me. I've read it a bunch of times and I've got marks all over it and stuff like that. So with the exception of your own book, would love to know, Victor, the book that you would recommend to others that can also have a very positive impact, or that's had a positive impact on you.
Probably the most powerful book from the point of view of creating a new business or even working with an existing business is the E-Myth series by Michael Gerber. It really breaks down, I consider it a business 101 book from a practitioner's perspective. It's written as a fable, as a narrative, where there's someone who likes to bake pies. That's her technical expertise. And so she opens a bakery. Well, being an expert at baking pies and running a bakery are not the same. And so bridging that gap is vitally important, understanding how to bridge that gap. And it doesn't matter whether you're looking to run that business or you're looking to invest passively in that business. You want to see those characteristics. You want to see the systems, the processes that enable that business to operate as a sustainable business. Ray Kroc bought the McDonald's locations from the McDonald's brothers. He didn't focus on hamburgers. He built the systems and processes. He focused on those systems and processes that enable a McDonald's franchise that's pulling in several million a year in revenue to be run by 18-year-olds. And it's all based on systems and processes. So when you adopt that mindset, that's how you get a sustainable business. And it doesn't matter whether it's your own business or you want to be working with somebody else. You want to see those characteristics E-Myth by Michael Gerber.
All right, E-Myth, Michael Gerber, fantastic system and processes. At the end of the day, it all comes back to that. So, Victor, this has been, like I said, it's been an absolute honor. You've shared so much information, so much knowledge with us, really helped us to understand more about looking for and getting the right people on the bus, also sharing with us your 5 principles for being able to attract capital, making sure that we do it in the right way. Love the analogy with the shoes, making sure that the shoes fit, because if they don't fit, it's just going to be a pain for everybody. And in there, I'm sure that there are so many people that are just like me that they're wondering, well, you know what? There's so much goodness here. How do I get more goodness from Victor? Learn more from him, about him. And I'd love for you to let us know, what are the best ways to get in touch with you, Victor?
The best way is directly through my website at victorjm.com. So very simple, victorjm.com. Love to have you as a listener on the Real Estate Espresso podcast daily show 7 days a week. It's literally your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. These are short form shows. This is not a 3-hour Joe Rogan show. These are 5-minute shows during the weekdays, and then the weekend edition, interviewing notable people from the world of real estate investing, usually 10 to 15-minute shows on the weekend. So it's literally your morning shot of espresso.
Fantastic. So now everyone knows, go to victorjm.com. You also want to make sure that you are a listener of the Real Estate Espresso podcast. I know I am. And Victor, like I said, this has been a fantastic interaction. Really appreciate you making the time to share with us, the Going Long listeners. And also for the Going Long listeners, this is Billy Keels, and we look forward to you joining us on the next episode. Have a great day. Wow, don't you love hearing from top-notch experts in the field? You know, when I was getting started, I really wish that I would have had access to such experts. And even more, I wish they would have given me like a really simple list of things to follow so that I could have gotten to my goals much faster and been much happier even sooner. So that's why I've created for you the 7 things that you should avoid in order to be successful in long-distance investing. And you can pick that up really easily by going to billykeels.com/7 things to avoid. And also, if you like today's episode, don't forget to leave a 5-star review. I'm looking forward to seeing you on our very next episode, so go out and make it a great day.